Welcome to Lecture 2B, Managing Construction Projects. I'm Tom Stevenson, and today we're going to be looking at the roles of the various participants on a construction project. So we'll start off with the project manager who's leading the project. And in construction projects, the project manager has a very fundamental role to play, especially between the client, the consultants, the budgeting, the estimating areas, compared to the site superintendent, who plays a very key role in regards to actually getting the project built, liaising very closely with all of the subcontractors and coordination, especially on the short-term scheduling, the more imminent work. The project manager is reporting to the client on the impacts of the more short-term work on the long-term project and hitting major milestones. And together they're collaborating and working to meet the overall project goals. So in the project management role, it involves the coordination of the entire construction project, and that's going from the initial planning, design, depends on the construction contract type. Design might not be that much of an impact if the project's a lump sum and it's already been designed, but if it's a design build or construction management project, then they could be heavily involved in that right from the get-go. Procurement, contracts with all the subcontractors, suppliers, etc. That's a big role that the project manager plays. And really, the overall development of the project charter, the goals that we've talked about, time, cost, quality, scope, safety, and the development of the project schedule, and ensuring that the schedule is going to meet the overall requirements that are listed in the contract with regards to time. And as I mentioned earlier, they're working in close relationship with the site superintendent. So very important to try to meet the project goals and deliver the project to the owner the way that they expected it to be within the budget parameters, so that the company can make a profit and the owner has no surprises in the process. So skills of the site supers, as I was mentioning, and project managers, you have to have excellent project management skills, excellent oral and written communication skills. You have to be able to be clear in what you're saying. You have to make sure that you haven't missed anything. You have to be able to document things. A lot of emails that go back and forth, it could be misinterpreted. So you want to make sure there's clarity, transparency, understanding in the communication process. You have to be pretty diplomatic. You have to be able to negotiate with clients. We're all selling and negotiating all the time, and we have to do it in such a way that we can build the business and have satisfied clients that'll become repeat clients. And as I think I mentioned earlier in one of the earlier lectures, 80% of our clients are repeat clients. So it's a lot of work if you got to go looking for new clients every time. And you have to be very observant, have good problem solving skills, being able to lead projects and being able to identify potential problem areas, be proactive on it, and be able to source the correct people that are required to solve these problems. So basic skills needed by CMs, some more skills, interpretation, when we talk about the technical side, interpretation of project drawings, specifications, being able to read, interpret those, understand what the intent is, and make sure that the requirements are followed. And if there's errors, be able to see those ahead of time. Very important in construction. Estimating ability, good fundamental math ability. It's not like it's rocket science. You do have to have good fundamental mathematics and good understanding of pulling the pieces together. One of the most difficult parts of estimating is when somebody doesn't really understand what they're looking at and can't interpret the drawings that well, and also making errors, simple errors in mathematics. Really understanding the construction technology, because you got to be able to figure out, well, what's our best methodology to use, and in consultation with the various trades, trying to figure out certain little differences could make the difference between being profitable or not profitable, starting on time, finishing on time. and being able to lead in those areas and utilize productivity software and the various computer technology programs that can help leverage your ability and improve the systems and processes within the company. So all of those aspects, and I've already mentioned negotiating, selling too, negotiating and selling, we're all trying to sell and negotiate all the time, as I mentioned. And you're the person, if you're a site super or you're a project manager, you lead the team. And so you create the culture on your project. It can be a positive culture or it can be a negative culture. We all have a circle of influence. And within that circle of influence and our circle of competence, we're able to have a big influence on the culture on the site. Is it a friendly culture? Is it an engaged culture? Is it a motivated culture? Is it a productive culture? These are all things that you lead on the projects, or you could go the other way too, where it goes south on you too. So you can choose. I would prefer to choose the lead to the road to success. So some of the functions: coordination of work, planning, scheduling, purchasing, procuring. Just think of procuring as getting the contracts, signing the contracts, getting commitments to perform the work. Site supervision. So that's involved with what's going on in the site, and the site superintendent really gets right on, hands-on, onto the site, making sure that what's in the contract, in the specification, actually gets done. Project managers liaising and coordinating with the site superintendent. So all these points: documentation, job site quality control, estimating, bidding. It's a pretty extensive list, and everybody has their strengths and everybody has their weaknesses, and you have to constantly be either working on your weaknesses or delegating your weaknesses to somebody that's their strength. Major parties from the contractor, the officer in charge. So that could be a high level VP of construction on a larger construction company. That could be the owner in a mid-size or smaller construction company. So that's sort of the different levels. If it's a small enough company, the officer in charge is the project manager as well, right? You're the chief cook and bottle washer. But in mid-sized to large-sized companies, then you have to have a hierarchy because there's just too much work going on. And so at the project level, you have the project manager. On very, very large projects, you can have a senior project manager and project managers below them. So it does depend on the scope of the project. You can think of like a Eglinton Crosstown, the LRT going across Eglinton. Like every station is like its own project. So you're going to have a project manager and a site super on those. But you're going to have at a higher level, an overarching level, somebody that's going to be project managing the whole project. And so those project managers will be reporting to that PM. Superintendent, and again, the same goes with that, what I just mentioned. So it can be project specific, there can be multiple superintendents, there can be also assistant site supers, project engineer, project coordinator, and these roles really sort of serve the function of helping the PM or helping the site superintendent or helping both, depending on how the company organizes its jobs and the job roles and what the responsibilities are. Those can vary somewhat from These three can somewhat vary from project to project. Foreman is the person that generally, if you self-perform the work, say concrete work, the foreman would be the lead tradesperson. They manage the trades on that site in that particular role. So if we've got a forming foreman, they're looking after the forming crews. And generally they come from the trade. So they've worked in the trade, they understand the trade really, really well, and they coordinate the workers. On smaller projects, they might even do the work themselves still. And then the trades themselves, they're the ones that have the expertise in their craft. They generally have a certificate of qualification for that particular trade, particularly in the compulsory mandatory trades like electrical, HVAC, plumbing, those trades. So a typical organization might look something like this. This is one example. You'll see later in the course there's other examples. Like in this example, you've got the site super reporting to the PM. I would suggest that on many of the projects that I've been on in the last 10 years, these two kind of play an equivalent role. So the site super doesn't report to the PM. They're kind of head of the operations on site, and the PM has their own people that are reporting to them. And then they collaborate and work together on the project. So whereas the PM would take in that case, the PM would take a bigger role reporting to the client, and the site super would take a bigger role on all the site issues. And of course, we have a safety manager, we have a quality manager, QC, QA, quality control, and quality assurance. One is setting the parameters of quality, the other is enforcing those parameters or setting up the inspection process and how that actually happens to ensure that quality is met. Estimator, there may be an estimator on the project, or somebody from estimating may be assigned to play a certain role on the project, especially for changes as they come up, right? The sites under the site super, generally the coordination of the subcontractors, their own forces if you self-perform the work, and etc. And there can be subcontractors to subcontractors. So the construction project manager, responsible for creating clear, attainable project goals at the highest level, building the project requirements, and managing the project constraints, which are cost, time, and scope. To a certain extent, that's the role. And again, they can be working for the GC or the owner. So you can have a PM that works for the owner. That would be like me being the project manager for e-building at George Brown College. That would be one example of that. And even on that building, there was a separate specific project manager for the building, whereas my role was to project manage for the division of technology. So where the project manager is a client owner representative, has to determine, implement the exact needs of the client. So that's looking after the client's interests. If you're the PM for the owner, you are working for the owner. So you're working for the facilities department, and your role is in charge of that. Good example, I did a lot of training at University of Toronto, and there was the facility managers group, and they have their own project managers. You know, a university like University of Toronto, they have a capital budget that they spend approximately $1 billion plus per year. They have new buildings going up. They have renovations and maintenance of existing buildings. So renovations and new buildings, those are all projects, and they'll assign a project manager to look after that project for facilities, to make sure that when the work is contracted out, the work is performed the way it should be performed, to ensure that the owner's interests are met. So that would be an example of a PM working for the owner. PM in a construction company would be more like the hierarchy I just showed you, where you've got the site superintendents you're collaborating with, you've got the subcontractors you're setting up the contracts directly with and managing those processes. And really, as a PM, you are the leader on the project. You are leading the overall trajectory of that project, where it's going. So responsibilities: assist in project selection, advise estimator and tendering stage on construction methods, study plans, specifications. You really become attuned to it, takes time. Establish the strategy and the methodology, and again, that's done in synchronization with the superintendent and other skilled people, such as schedulers. If it's a large project, there'll be a professional scheduler assigned to the project. That wasn't shown on the hierarchy. Coordination of the guidelines and how we're going to break down the project, and organizing the budget, organizing the benchmark schedule, known as a baseline. So these are all roles that the PM plays on the project. So a lot of responsibility. Adapt standard contract documents for the subs, do the procurement, negotiate, do continuous relations with the client and the consultants, to ensure that the requirements are being met, and break bad news when bad news comes to the client, that there's going to be extra charges for a variety of things, and taking care of those extra charges and changes as change order formal documentation, change directives, when you're making a change but it hasn't been signed off yet. Change order is a signed off document, becomes part of the contract. So these are all those elements, as well as the coordination that must take place with the site superintendent and all the physical work that's actually happening on the project. Because at the end of the day, you don't have that, you don't have a project. Ensuring that milestones are targeted, they're monitored, work flows towards it. If you're falling behind, that time is then recovered in a new recovery schedule. So different project iterations and different plans that are being organized, and ensuring that people have the tools that they need to perform the work that they need to do, and that there is clear lines of communication and accountabilities in place for the project. Also ensuring that risk levels are effectively managed, monitored, and planned for based on probabilities, impacts, and in other words, likelihood of them happening. Site superintendent, as I kind of already alluded to, is the point person on the construction site and operations manager, the key operations manager on the site. So that's the difference. It's really much closer to the work actually physically getting done. Not that the PM isn't that close, but not the way the site super is. And very often it is a helpful process if both the PM and the site super, they take weekly walks of the site together and they discuss what's going on. And we'll talk about that later in the course. If you can remember it, it's called MBWA, Management by Wandering Around. I'll get into that a little bit later. Or if you're really interested in some of those things, you can click subscribe and you'll see more in-depth videos that I have on YouTube that you can sort of dive into. But if I don't cover it in this, then you don't have to necessarily worry about it. So site superintendent, most difficult task maybe to take care of scheduling, timing, the ups and downs of site variations, workers coming and going, not enough resources on site, rework not meeting quality expectations. So all of these things play into these roles of the site superintendent. And to be honest, I could probably spend 3 hours just on this slide if I wanted to. Organize, coordinate, supervise the work. So you get the aspect of what I've explained already, I think. Portion work among employees, trying to make sure that people have the right loading of work, that they're not overloaded or underloaded. Collaboration with all the administrators on the site, keeping really good records so that if there's delays, who caused the delay, what was the impact of the delay. This can be very helpful in managing the costs and managing the timing of the project. We have to be sure that if we're causing a delay, that we take action to fix it. If we're not causing the delay, that the parties that are notified of that. And if there's cost implications, then we enter that negotiation, bring in the estimator, bring in the PM, and we work out what those costs are, and then we try to get a change order. Actually, another key point I should say before I move on, lead inspection and commission of day-to-day construction work. So you're always walking the site, you're always managing by wandering around, as we say, MBWA, and ensuring that work is meeting the requirements. You're also ensuring, are people doing the items that are on the critical path? Sometimes you have a lot of people doing work, but they're doing the wrong work at the wrong time. They should be, their resources would be more effective doing things that are on the critical path. Critical path items are any items that if they take longer, they delay the project. Non-critical items or items with float, that means you got flexibility. Maybe you got 10 electricians working on area that has float. Meanwhile, you got 3 working on the critical path item and it's falling behind. That's not effective use of your resources. So the construction estimator, it's a big role in project management. You kind of have different paths that you can take in this industry. You can kind of take the estimating path, the PM path, or the site super path, and they're kind of different in some ways. The estimating, the typical construction estimator is not on site. They're at head office and they're doing estimates and takeoffs. If it was a really big site, yes, you may have an estimator, but most of the time they're actually in an office and they're doing their estimates for projects that you will never get and projects that you win, right? So there's a lot of, usually you might be pricing 3 or 4 projects before you get one. And so that means more than often than not, you're estimating projects that you don't get. If you're getting every project, you got to ask yourself, why are we getting every project? You know, that might be a problem too. You're pricing them too low. There is that role that the estimator plays. And if the estimator makes a big mistake and you get a project, it's going to be hard to pull a rabbit out of the hat and make that project profitable. So estimating is a very lucrative field for careers, just as project management is very lucrative, just as site superintendents are very lucrative. On big projects, I'm not going to say there's a significant difference from a senior estimator to a senior project manager to a senior superintendent. It just depends on the company and the roles that you're playing. But for sure, it can be pretty stressful estimating, because if you make mistakes, it can be very difficult to recover from. So you have to be detail oriented. And you have to be able to collect, analyze information. You have to look at historical data. There's all kinds of industry standards with regards to cost rates and factoring, depending on the uniqueness of the project. And you have to be very good with numbers and the particular software programs that you may be using to do the estimates, right? So detail oriented that way. And review preliminary drawings, visit construction site if there's anything unusual that should be factored into the costing. Determine labor is probably the most difficult to estimate because there's so many variables to labor. Material, if you get good at it in quantities, they can be much more accurate in that way. You have to be able to analyze the bids, see if that's makes sense, because sometimes subcontractors make sense and make mistakes. And if you go with their price, that can cause a whole bunch of problems as well. Allow for waste. Construction, as you'll see later in the course, it's not a great industry with regards to waste. So you have to allocate for that. And you also have to allocate that the project's not going to run perfectly. What's the most realistic bet with regards to time and cost on this project? And during construction, you may have to manage costs. You may be involved in negotiations, settlement of change orders, see what you'll have a good role to play as to where the bottom line is with costs before you're actually losing money. And you can also be called upon as expert witness is in construction case, where you have to lay out in detail, in very fine detail, where the cost implications are. Construction safety is really, really important in construction. People's lives are literally at stake. And so a safety coordinator is somebody that specializes in safety. They know the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations for construction projects inside and out, and they administer and ensure that the construction company is doing its due diligence. Due diligence is a terminology that's used. I mean, they've done everything they could to provide a safe site. They also have to document accidents. They have to do the proper reporting depending on the severity of the accident to make sure that everything is following government regulations. There is a lot involved here and people's lives are at stake, as I said. And there's also the whole aspect of WSIB, Workers' Safety and Insurance Board, and reporting requirements. I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. So pre-construction site meetings, site and project orientation, hazard assessments, incident investigations, training, inspections, safety meetings, toolbox talks. Toolbox talks are talks that you would have like on a weekly or daily basis to highlight upcoming things that might be dangerous and to go over them. It's a good way of involving and engaging people and making people aware on a constant basis of safety. It's so easy to forget something for a second or to have crazy things happening like this on a site. So you have to make sure that you are very clear, and this is an example of what not to do, right? This is where you got a harness, fall arrest system, you got proper signage on the site, making sure that that's taken care of, and that you're prepared for an emergency. So you're not scrambling and running around. If somebody does get hurt, you have process procedures. You know exactly what to do, how to direct emergency services and the frontline responders directly to the accident. Quality control, big deal in construction, because if you have to do things twice, if you do them wrong or you use the wrong materials, big cost implications. So you want to lose money on a project, mess up your quality management, your quality control, your quality assurance processes, and that will be a problem. So developing a quality assurance, quality control plan, very important in construction. And generally on large projects, you'll have somebody that's responsible for that. And usually the company at a higher level has somebody that looks after and manages those processes and procedures so that you have systems in place that you don't mess things up. So in system development, the company-wide, as I mentioned, quality assurance program and project-specific quality control plan, and to ensure that the program is fully understood and that it's followed and it's implemented and followed through inspections, that there's meetings with regards to that to ensure that there's not areas that are missed, and that there's inspections, audits, checks, validations, checklists to ensure that processes are in place and that items are not being missed. And it's a continuous improvement area. So that plan, do, check, act, PDCA that we mentioned in the previous lecture ties into this whole QCQA program. Coordinating quality management, managing construction quality control plan, administering inspections, monitoring non-conformance reports, maintaining the database of deficiencies, corrections, reworks, and dealing with warranty issues, and providing feedback for continuous improvement. That's what quality control is all about. So in summary, we've looked at the roles very briefly of the various players involved with the construction company. We showed you one hierarchy. There are a number of hierarchies, so don't get stuck that that's the only one. It also kind of depends on the project design, so keep that in mind. But I think you've got a good sort of sense now of some of the job roles and what the individuals do. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. It's Tom Stevenson signing off for now, and have an excellent day.